in the quiet corridors of power where nations reshape their destinies. A moment of profound significance is unfolding for Canada. Prime Minister Mark Carney, the former central banker, who assumed the country's highest political office less than a year ago, is preparing to embark on a journey that could fundamentally alter the trajectory of Canadian foreign policy and economic strategy. On January 13, 2026, Carney will board a plane bound for Beijing, marking the first visit to China by a Canadian Prime Minister in over 8 years. This is not merely a diplomatic courtesy call, nor is it simply about mending fences with an estranged trading partner. Rather, it represents a calculated, strategic pivot that speaks to the deeper anxieties and aspirations of a nation caught between the powerful gravitational forces of global superpowers. The story of how Canada arrived at this moment is one of tension, transformation, and the relentless pressure of geopolitical realities. For decades, Canada's economic prosperity has been inextricably linked to its relationship with the United States, its neighbor to the south and by far its largest trading partner. The two nations share the world's longest undefended border, a common language and cultural heritage, and economic ties so deep that disruptions to trade between them can send shockwaves through entire industries. Yet in recent years, those ties have become increasingly fraught, strained by tariff disputes, trade tensions, and the unpredictable policies of American administrations that have left Canadian exporters, manufacturers, and workers feeling vulnerable and exposed. Mark Carney understood this vulnerability perhaps better than any other Canadian leader in recent memory. His background as the governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England gave him a sophisticated understanding of global financial systems, trade dynamics, and the intricate web of economic dependencies that bind nations together. When he took office in March 2025, following a historic election that saw him lead the Liberal Party to a minority government victory, Carney inherited a country facing what he would later describe as unprecedented threats to its economic security. The United States had imposed or threatened tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, automobiles, lumber, and other critical exports. Each tariff announcement sent tremors through Canadian industries, forcing plant closures, job losses, and a growing sense that Canada could no longer afford to place all its economic eggs in the American basket. The solution, as Carney saw it, was not to abandon the American relationship, which would be both impossible and undesirable, but rather to diversify, to build resilience through expanded partnerships with other major economies around the world. And no economy looms larger on the global stage, apart from the United States itself, than China. The People's Republic of China, with its population of over 1 billion people, its rapidly growing middle class, its massive infrastructure investments, and its insatiable appetite for resources and energy, represents an opportunity that Canada simply cannot afford to ignore. In 2024, bilateral trade between Canada and China totaled approximately $118.7 billion, making China Canada's second-largest trading partner. Yet that relationship had been frozen in time, paralyzed by years of diplomatic hostility and mutual suspicion. To understand why a Canadian Prime Minister has not set foot in China since 2017, one must revisit the events that shattered the relationship between the two countries. In December 2018, Canadian authorities, acting on an extradition request from the United States, arrested Meng Wanzhou, the chief financial officer of Huawei Technologies, while she was changing planes at Vancouver International Airport. The arrest, which related to allegations of sanctions violations, enraged the Chinese government, which viewed it as a political act orchestrated by Washington and executed by its Canadian allies. Within days, China retaliated by detaining two Canadian citizens, Michael Kovrig, a former diplomat, and Michael Spavor, a businessman. The two men would spend nearly 3 years in Chinese detention. Their fates intertwined with the complex diplomatic chess game surrounding Meng's extradition proceedings. Their ordeal, which Canadians came to refer to as arbitrary detention and hostage diplomacy, poisoned relations between the two countries for years. Even after Meng's eventual release and the return of Kovrig and Spavor in 2021, the relationship remained deeply troubled. The government of Justin Trudeau, Carney's predecessor, maintained a wary, often hostile stance toward China. In 2022, then Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly published an Indo-Pacific strategy that labeled China as an increasingly disruptive force in global affairs and sought to deepen Canada's ties with democratic partners in the region rather than with Beijing. A year later, Trudeau called a judicial inquiry to investigate allegations of Chinese interference in Canadian elections, following leaked intelligence reports suggesting that China had attempted to influence the outcomes of recent votes, while the inquiry ultimately concluded that election results had not been materially affected. The very existence of such an investigation served as a constant irritant in the relationship between Ottawa and Beijing. Mark Carney, however, came to power with a different vision, one shaped by pragmatism rather than ideology, by economic necessity rather than moral posturing. Within months of assuming office, Carney began signaling his willingness to recalibrate Canada's approach to China. In October 2025, on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in Jeju, South Korea, Carney held what he would later describe as a turning-point meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping. It was the first formal leader-to-leader contact between Canada and China since 2017, and it marked a dramatic departure from the frost of the Trudeau years. During that meeting, she extended a personal invitation to Carney to visit China for a state visit. An invitation that Carney accepted without hesitation. That acceptance set in motion months of careful diplomatic preparation, back-channel negotiations, and the gradual thawing of a relationship that had seemed irreparably damaged. The upcoming visit from January 13th to 17th is laden with symbolism and substance in equal measure. Carney will meet not only with President Xi Jinping, but also with Premier Li Qiang and a range of other senior government officials and business leaders. The agenda, according to official statements, will cover trade, energy, agriculture, and international security. But beneath those broad categories lie specific, urgent issues that both nations desperately want to resolve. For Canada, the most pressing concern is the tariffs that China has imposed on Canadian agricultural products in retaliation for Canada's decision to levy 100% tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, steel, and other goods. Chinese tariffs of 76% on Canadian canola seed imports and 100% on canola oil, along with 25% tariffs on certain pork, fish, and seafood products, have devastated farmers and exporters across Canada's prairie provinces. The canola industry, in particular, has become a flashpoint in this trade dispute, illustrating how domestic political pressures can complicate international diplomacy. Canola farmers in Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba have watched their markets evaporate as Chinese tariffs made their products uncompetitive. These farmers, many of whom operate family farms that have been passed down through generations, now face an impossible choice between absorbing catastrophic losses or abandoning crops that have sustained their livelihoods for decades. They have demanded that Carney lift or reduce the tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, arguing that protecting Ontario's automotive industry should not come at the expense of Western Canada's agricultural sector. Yet Ontario Premier Doug Ford has urged Carney to stand firm on the electric vehicle tariffs, arguing that Canada cannot be seen as backing down in the face of Chinese economic pressure. This internal tension within Canada, between different provinces with competing economic interests, illustrates one of the fundamental challenges Carney faces. Canada is not a monolithic entity with a single unified economic interest. It is a vast country spanning 6 time zones, with regional economies that often have little in common beyond their shared currency and federal government. The automotive heartland of Ontario has very different priorities than the resource-rich provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan, which in turn have different concerns than the forestry-dependent communities of British Columbia. Carney's challenge is to craft a China policy that serves the national interest while managing these divergent regional pressures and preventing them from tearing apart the fragile political coalition that keeps his minority government in power. Beyond the immediate question of tariffs, Carney sees enormous potential in expanding Canada's energy trade with China. The completion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which now allows Canadian crude oil to reach Pacific Coast terminals, has already enabled record oil exports to China. Carney has been working to clear regulatory hurdles that would allow for the construction of additional pipeline infrastructure to further boost these shipments. For a country blessed with vast reserves of oil, natural gas, and other natural resources, China's growing energy needs represent a market opportunity of staggering proportions. British Columbia officials, in particular, have expressed optimism that Carney's visit could open doors for the province's liquefied natural gas industry, its critical mineral sector, and its forestry products, all of which have struggled under the weight of American tariffs and a sluggish domestic market. Yet, for all the economic opportunities that closer ties with China might offer, Carney must also navigate treacherous political and security waters. The Chinese Communist Party, as former diplomat Michael Kovrig, who spent 3 years in Chinese detention, has noted, has a well-established track record of using economic relationships for political leverage. Countries that become too dependent on Chinese trade often find themselves vulnerable to coercion when their policies displease Beijing. Australia learned this lesson painfully when China imposed punishing tariffs on Australian wine, barley, and coal, after the Australian government called for an independent investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Lithuania faced similar economic retaliation after it allowed Taiwan to open a de facto embassy in Vilnius, Canada, with its small population and export-dependent economy. Could be particularly vulnerable to such pressure if it allows itself to become too economically intertwined with China without maintaining sufficient diversification. The domestic political landscape in Canada adds another layer of complexity to Carney's China strategy. Within his own Liberal Party, tensions are emerging between the progressive wing, which dominated policy-making during the Trudeau years and championed human rights and climate action, and the more fiscally conservative, economically focused faction that has gained influence under Carney's leadership. Environmental activists have criticized Carney's willingness to approve new pipeline projects and his memorandum of understanding with Alberta that exempts certain oil sands developments from greenhouse gas emissions caps. Former Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault resigned from cabinet in protest over that deal. Now, as Carney prepares to deepen ties with a country that progressives often criticize for its human rights record, its treatment of Uyghur minorities, and its authoritarian political system, he risks alienating the very voters who delivered the Liberal Party's victory in the last election. The timing of Carney's visit is particularly significant, given the broader international context. The visit comes at a moment when the global trading order appears to be stagnating, when the rules-based international system that has governed commerce for decades is under unprecedented strain. American protectionism under various administrations has shaken confidence in free trade. China's Belt and Road Initiative has created new patterns of economic dependency and influence across Asia, Africa, and beyond. Europe is struggling to maintain economic growth while managing its relationship with both the United States and China. In this fluid, uncertain environment, middle powers like Canada must make difficult choices about how to position themselves, which partnerships to prioritize, and how to preserve their sovereignty and economic security in a world increasingly dominated by great power competition. Carney's visit to China will be closely watched, not only in Ottawa and Beijing, but also in Washington, where American policymakers will scrutinize every agreement, every joint statement, every sign of warming relations between Canada and China. The United States has made clear its preference that its allies maintain distance from China, particularly on sensitive technologies, critical infrastructure, and security matters. Canada is a member of the Five Eyes Intelligence Sharing Alliance alongside the United States, United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, and any perception that Canada is compromising security for economic gain could strain those relationships. Yet Canada also cannot afford to ignore the economic reality that the United States, under multiple administrations, has shown itself willing to impose tariffs and trade restrictions on Canadian goods, despite the supposedly special relationship between the two countries. What makes this moment particularly fascinating is that it represents a test of whether a country like Canada, squeezed between competing superpowers, can successfully pursue a strategy of strategic diversification without alienating either side. Carney has framed his approach as moving Canada's economy from reliance to resilience, from a model built on dependence on a single trading partner to one characterized by multiple partnerships and greater flexibility. He has set an ambitious goal of doubling Canada's non-United States exports over the next decade, a target that would require not just better relations with China but also expanded trade with Europe, India, Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America. The visit to China, followed immediately by a trip to Qatar and then to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, is part of this broader diplomatic offensive to position Canada as an attractive destination for global investment and a reliable partner in an unreliable world. As Carney's plane takes off for Beijing on January 13th, he carries with him the hopes, fears, and contradictions of a nation at a crossroads. Canadian farmers hope for relief from tariffs that threaten their livelihoods. Business leaders hope for expanded market access and new investment opportunities. Security officials hope that economic engagement will not compromise national security. Progressive activists hope that the pursuit of economic growth will not mean abandoning principles of human rights and environmental protection. And ordinary Canadians, struggling with rising costs of living, hope that their leaders can navigate these complex international waters in a way that brings prosperity, stability, and security to their communities. Whether Mark Carney's strategic gamble on China will pay off remains to be seen. But one thing is certain. The days when Canada could rely comfortably on its American partnership as the foundation of its economic security are over. And the journey toward a more diversified, more resilient, and perhaps more uncertain future has begun in earnest. If you found this deep dive into Canadian politics and international relations valuable, and want to stay informed about the critical geopolitical shifts shaping the Western world, then please take a moment to like this video, share it with others who care about global affairs and economic strategy, and subscribe to the West is Best channel. We are committed to bringing you thoughtful analysis, comprehensive coverage, and the stories that mainstream media often overlooks, helping you understand the complex forces reshaping our nations and our future. Your support enables us to continue producing in-depth content that goes beyond the headlines and explores the real issues that matter. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next video.